I checked my watch. 2:45 p.m. In 45 minutes, I would be sitting across a conference table from people who had the power to change everything I'd experienced that morning. The question was whether they would be willing to listen to what their own customers were trying to tell them through experiences like mine. As I gathered my belongings and headed toward the exit to catch a cab to Pinnacle's corporate headquarters, I felt a familiar surge of anticipation mixed with determination. This was why I'd accepted the board position, why I'd been willing to take on the challenge of helping to turn around an airline that had lost its way. The morning's delay had been frustrating, certainly, but it had also been a gift. It had given me ammunition, insight, and most importantly, a story that would be impossible for Pinnacle's leadership to dismiss or rationalize away. In 45 minutes, the real conversation would begin. The taxi pulled up to Pinnacle Airlines corporate headquarters at exactly 3:15 p.m., giving me just enough time to compose myself before what promised to be one of the most significant meetings of my career. The building rose 37 floors above downtown Denver, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun and the mountains beyond. I'd been in plenty of airline corporate offices over the years, but there was something about walking into Pinnacle's headquarters, knowing what I now knew about their operational priorities, that made every detail feel significant. The lobby was impressive in the way that successful corporations design their public spaces to be impressive. Marble floors, contemporary art, and a massive LED display showing real-time flight information from Pinnacle's network. I watched the display for a moment, noting the scattered delays and cancellations that painted a picture of an airline struggling with the kind of operational challenges I'd experienced firsthand that morning. The elevator ride to the 34th floor gave me time to review my mental notes one final time. The delayed departure, the frustrated passengers, the helpless gate agent, the stressed flight crew, and most telling of all, the casual entitlement of the VIP passengers who had caused the entire situation without seeming to consider its impact on anyone else. Rebecca met me at the elevator, her expression carrying the kind of focused intensity that meant she'd been managing details and putting out fires all afternoon. Marcus, perfect timing. The board members started arriving about 20 minutes ago, and there's definitely an undercurrent of tension around today's agenda. We walked down a corridor lined with photographs of Pinnacle aircraft and milestones from the company's 43-year history. Tell me about the dynamics I'm walking into, I said, adjusting my tie and checking my watch. Thomas Hartwell arrived about an hour ago, and he's clearly dealing with some kind of crisis. He's been on calls non-stop, and his assistant mentioned something about a significant operational incident this morning that's created public relations problems. Rebecca paused outside the boardroom door. The other directors seemed to be aware that today's meeting might focus more heavily on operational issues than originally planned. The irony was almost too perfect. I was about to walk into a crisis meeting about operational failures while carrying first-hand experience of exactly the kind of incident they were probably discussing. Through the glass doors of the boardroom, I could see several figures in business attire engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation. One more thing, Rebecca added quietly. Margaret Chen, the board chair, specifically asked that you be prepared to share your perspectives on customer experience and operational efficiency. She mentioned that your background gives you a unique viewpoint that the board needs to hear. The boardroom was everything I'd expected from a major airline's executive conference space. A massive mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather chairs and equipped with the latest video conferencing technology. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Denver skyline and the mountains beyond. The walls displayed historical photographs of Pinnacle's fleet evolution and route expansion over the decades. Margaret Chen, the board chair, greeted me with the kind of firm handshake and direct eye contact that spoke to decades of corporate leadership experience. She was in her early 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. Marcus, welcome to Pinnacle. We're looking forward to your insights, especially given today's particular circumstances. She gestured toward the other board members who were gathered around the conference table. I think you'll find that your timing for joining us couldn't be better. We're facing some operational challenges that require exactly the kind of expertise you bring to the table. I was introduced to the other directors. Robert Martinez, former CEO of a major logistics company. Dr. Sarah Williams, who had spent 20 years in airline finance. James Patterson, a veteran of the hospitality industry, and Linda Foster, whose background was in customer experience consulting. Each brought a different perspective to airline governance. But I sensed that my operational background was particularly relevant to whatever crisis was unfolding. At exactly 3:30, Thomas Hartwell entered the boardroom, and the energy in the room immediately shifted. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his late 40s, with the kind of commanding presence that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. His entrance was followed by two assistants carrying what appeared to be crisis management materials and several mobile phones. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience with the scheduling adjustment," Hartwell began, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "I'm afraid we're dealing with a significant operational incident that occurred this morning, and it's going to require immediate board attention." He gestured to one of his assistants, who began distributing folders containing what appeared to be incident reports and media monitoring summaries. Flight 2847 from Chicago to Denver experienced a delay of over 2 hours this morning due to VIP accommodation requirements. The incident has generated significant negative social media attention and is already being picked up by travel industry publications. I felt a surge of recognition mixed with anticipation. Flight 2847. My flight. The very incident I'd experienced was now the subject of a board crisis meeting, and Thomas Hartwell was clearly unaware that he was about to receive feedback from someone who had lived through every minute of the operational failure he was describing. Margaret Chen opened the folder and began reviewing the materials. "Thomas, help us understand the scope of this incident. What exactly happened, and why is it requiring board-level attention?" Hartwell's expression was grim as he began explaining the morning's events. A group of high-priority passengers required special accommodations that necessitated significant operational adjustments. The delay impacted 127 regular passengers, and the situation was complicated by what appears to have been inadequate communication and insufficient contingency planning. He clicked a remote, and a wall-mounted display showed social media posts and news articles that had already begun circulating about the incident. I scanned the headlines: Pinnacle Airlines delays flight for VIP passengers, regular customers left waiting while elite travelers board first, and is this the future of air travel? The public relations impact is already significant, Hartwell continued. Our customer service department has fielded over 200 complaints since this morning, and the incident is being used as an example of everything that's wrong with modern airline customer service. Dr. Williams leaned forward, studying the incident report. "Thomas, walk us through the decision-making process that led to this delay. What protocols were followed, and where did the system break down?" I listened as Hartwell described the morning's events from the airline's perspective, noting how his version differed from what I'd actually experienced. According to his account, the VIP passengers had, quote, unexpected scheduling requirements that required operational flexibility. The regular passengers had experienced minor inconvenience that was handled according to standard procedures. The sanitized corporate language was a stark contrast to the reality of frustrated families, stressed business travelers, and overwhelmed gate agents that I'd witnessed. I realized that this disconnect between corporate perception and customer reality was exactly the kind of problem that my board position was meant to address. Robert Martinez spoke up, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had managed operational crises before. The immediate question is containment and response. What are we doing to manage the public relations fallout, and how do we prevent similar incidents in the future? That's exactly why I wanted to discuss this with the board immediately, Hartwell replied. This incident represents a broader challenge we're facing with balancing VIP service requirements and operational efficiency. We need to establish clearer policies and procedures that protect both our high-value customers and our operational integrity. Margaret Chen turned toward me, and I sensed that my moment to contribute to the conversation had arrived. "Marcus, given your background in airline operations, I'd be interested in your perspective on this situation. What do you see as the core issues here, and how should we approach addressing them?" I set down the incident report and looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member before beginning to speak. This was the moment I'd been preparing for without knowing it. the opportunity to bridge the gap between corporate decision-making and customer reality. Before I share my thoughts on this incident, I began carefully. I think it would be helpful for the board to understand that I have some direct insight into this particular situation. Thomas Hartwell looked puzzled. I'm not sure I follow. Are you familiar with the operational procedures involved in VIP passenger accommodation? I smiled slightly, feeling the weight of the morning's experience and the anticipation of what I was about to reveal. Thomas, I'm familiar with this specific incident because I was passenger 47B on flight 2847 this morning. The silence that followed was profound. I watched as the realization dawned on each face around the table. Thomas Hartwell's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching shock. Margaret Chen's eyebrows raised slightly, and I caught what might have been the hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. You were on the flight, Dr. Williams said, her voice carrying a mix of surprise and curiosity. You experienced this incident as a passenger. I did, I confirmed, opening my laptop and accessing the notes I'd taken during and after the flight. I was traveling to Denver for this meeting, and I had the opportunity to observe every aspect of this operational failure from the customer's perspective. Thomas Hartwell was clearly trying to process this unexpected development. You were delayed by over 2 hours because of the VIP accommodations, and you didn't identify yourself to the crew or gate agents? I saw no reason to do so, I replied. I was traveling as a regular passenger, and I wanted to experience exactly what our customers experience when these operational decisions are made. What I observed was extremely illuminating. I turned my laptop screen toward the table, displaying the detailed notes I'd taken throughout the morning. The incident report accurately describes the timeline and the basic facts, but it misses the human impact of the operational choices that were made. Margaret Chen leaned forward, clearly interested in hearing more. Tell us what you observed that isn't captured in the official incident report. I spent the next 20 minutes walking the board through the morning's experience from a passenger's perspective. The initial confusion and frustration as the delay was announced. The helplessness of the gate agent, who had to repeatedly deliver bad news without adequate information or authority to offer solutions. The cascading impact on families with children, business travelers with tight schedules, and connecting passengers whose entire travel plans were disrupted. The businessman sitting next to me missed a crucial client meeting, I explained. The mother with 2 young children nearly missed her daughter's medical appointment. The gate agent, Jessica, was clearly frustrated by her inability to provide meaningful assistance or accurate information to increasingly upset passengers. Thomas Hartwell was taking notes as I spoke, his expression growing more serious as I detailed the various ways the operational decision had rippled through the customer experience. These impacts aren't captured in our standard incident reporting procedures, he acknowledged. That's part of the problem, I continued. The incident report treats this as a logistics challenge that was successfully resolved. But from a customer perspective, this was a service failure that damaged trust and loyalty across 127 individual passenger experiences. I clicked to another section of my notes. I also observed the crew's response to the situation. The flight attendants were professional and did their best to manage passenger frustration, but they were clearly operating within constraints that prevented them from addressing the root causes of customer dissatisfaction. Linda Foster, whose background was in customer experience consulting, spoke up. Marcus, from your observations, what would you identify as the primary failure points in how the situation was handled? The fundamental issue, I replied, is that the airline's operational priorities create a system where some customers are treated as inherently more valuable than others, and that hierarchy inevitably leads to situations where the majority of passengers suffer inconvenience to accommodate the preferences of a small minority. I turned to address Thomas Hartwell directly. The VIP passengers who caused this delay will probably never know or care about the impact their special requirements had on other travelers. They experienced smooth, efficient service that reinforced their expectation of preferential treatment. Meanwhile, 127 other passengers experienced frustration, inconvenience, and a demonstration that their time and needs are considered less important. The room was quiet as the board members absorbed my analysis. Robert Martinez was the first to speak. So you're suggesting that our VIP service model is fundamentally incompatible with reliable operations for regular passengers? I'm suggesting that our current approach to VIP service prioritizes short-term accommodation over long-term customer loyalty and operational integrity, I replied. Every time we delay a flight to accommodate special requests, we're making a choice about which customers matter more. That choice has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate operational challenge. Dr. Williams had been reviewing financial data on her tablet while I spoke. Marcus, do you have a sense of the economic impact of this approach? Are we prioritizing high-value customers in a way that actually damages overall profitability? I had been hoping someone would ask that question. Based on what I observed this morning, and extrapolating from my experience in airline operations, I would estimate that this single incident probably cost Pinnacle significantly more in lost customer loyalty and negative publicity than any amount of VIP service revenue it generated. I pulled up industry data on my laptop. The average customer lifetime value for regular passengers, when you account for repeat bookings, word-of-mouth recommendations, and loyalty program participation, is substantial. When you damage that relationship to accommodate VIP preferences, you're often trading long-term profitability for short-term convenience. Thomas Hartwell was clearly processing this analysis in the context of Pinnacle's broader operational challenges. Are you suggesting that we should eliminate VIP services entirely? Not at all, I replied. I'm suggesting that we need to find ways to provide exceptional service to high-value customers without compromising our reliability and service quality for everyone else. The best airlines in the world manage to do both. Margaret Chen had been taking notes throughout my presentation, and now she looked up with the expression of someone who had found the insight she was looking for. Marcus, given your unique perspective on this incident, what would you recommend as our immediate next steps? I had been thinking about this question since the moment I realized I was living through a case study in operational dysfunction. First, we need to completely review our VIP accommodation procedures to identify which special services can be provided without impacting other passengers. Second, we need to improve our communication protocols so that gate agents and crew members have better information and more authority to manage passenger expectations. Third, we need to implement better contingency planning so that when special accommodations are necessary, they don't create cascading operational failures. I paused to make sure I had everyone's attention before continuing. But most importantly, we need to fundamentally rethink our definition of customer service. Right now, we're treating customer service as a zero-sum game. We're providing exceptional service to some passengers requires providing substandard service to others. The best customer service creates value for everyone. James Patterson, who had been quietly listening throughout my presentation, finally spoke up. This morning's incident aside, Marcus, what's your overall assessment of Pinnacle's operational culture based on your observations? That was the question I had been hoping to address. Based on this morning's experience, and on the industry analysis I've done in preparation for joining this board, I believe Pinnacle has developed a culture that prioritizes accommodation over accountability. We're so focused on saying yes to special requests that we've lost sight of our fundamental responsibility to provide reliable, respectful service to all of our customers. I clicked to a final slide in my presentation. The frontline employees I interacted with today, from the gate agent to the flight attendants, were clearly committed to providing good customer service. But they're operating within a system that often requires them to deliver bad news without adequate tools or authority to offer solutions. That's not a personnel problem, it's a policy problem. Thomas Hartwell had been unusually quiet during the latter part of my presentation, and I could see him weighing the implications of what I was describing. Finally, he spoke up. Marcus, you're describing a comprehensive operational and cultural transformation. Are you confident that such changes would actually improve our financial performance? Thomas, I'm confident that our current approach is unsustainable, I replied. The negative publicity from this morning's incident is just the latest example of how our operational priorities are damaging our brand and our customer relationships. We can continue trying to manage the symptoms, or we can address the underlying causes. Dr. Williams had been reviewing financial projections while I spoke. The numbers support Marcus's analysis, she said, looking up from her tablet. Customer acquisition costs have been rising, while customer retention rates have been declining. We're spending more money to replace customers we're losing due to service issues. Margaret Chen looked around the table, clearly preparing to move the discussion toward decision-making. It sounds like we have a clear choice to make. We can continue with our current operational approach and deal with the ongoing customer service crises, or we can commit to the kind of systematic changes Marcus is describing. Robert Martinez leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Before we make any major policy decisions, I think we need to understand the scope of what we're discussing. Marcus, if we were to implement the changes you're recommending, what would that look like in practical terms? I had been preparing for this question throughout my analysis of Pinnacle's operations. We're talking about a fundamental shift from a reactive, accommodation-based approach to a proactive, standards-based approach. Instead of saying yes to every special request and then scrambling to accommodate it, we establish clear service standards that apply to all passengers and then find ways to exceed those standards consistently. I opened a new document on my laptop. For example, instead of delaying flights for VIP boarding preferences, we create VIP services that enhance the experience without impacting operational reliability. Priority check-in, expedited security, premium lounges, upgraded seating, personalized attention from crew members. All of these can be provided without making other passengers wait. Thomas Hartwell was clearly thinking through the operational implications. That would require significant changes to our current procedures and probably some investment in new service infrastructure. It would, I agreed. But the alternative is continuing to damage our reputation and lose customers through operational failures like this morning's incident. The investment in systematic improvements will pay for itself through improved customer retention and positive word of mouth. Linda Foster had been reviewing customer feedback data on her tablet. Marcus, the customer complaints we've received about this morning's incident specifically mention feeling like second-class passengers and being treated as less important than VIP travelers. That suggests the reputational damage from these incidents extends beyond immediate inconvenience. Exactly, I replied. When customers feel that an airline doesn't respect their time or value their business, that perception influences all of their future interactions with the company. They become more likely to choose competitors, less likely to recommend the airline to others, and more likely to share negative experiences on social media. Margaret Chen was clearly ready to move toward concrete next steps. Thomas, given what we've learned from Marcus's first-hand experience with this incident, what's your recommendation for immediate action? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The gate agent's voice crackled through the intercom at 7:43 a.m., 17 minutes before my scheduled departure to Denver. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight 2847 will be experiencing a brief delay due to priority boarding procedures for our valued executive passengers. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been reviewing quarterly reports, coffee growing cold in my hand. Around me, fellow travelers groaned and shuffled in their seats. The businessman next to me muttered something about corporate privilege, while a mother with 2 young children sighed heavily, checking her connecting flight information. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd specifically chosen the 8 a.m. departure from Chicago O'Hare because it was supposed to be efficient, direct, and would get me to my destination with time to spare. What the other passengers didn't know, what the gate agent announcing the delay didn't know, and what the pilot currently holding up our departure certainly didn't know, was that I had somewhere extremely important to be. In exactly 6 hours, I was scheduled to walk into the boardroom of Pinnacle Airlines as their newly appointed board member, a position I'd worked toward for the past 15 years in aviation management. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very airline I was about to help govern was currently demonstrating exactly the kind of customer service issues I'd been hired to address. The delay stretched from 15 minutes to 30, then to 45. I watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as a sleek black sedan pulled up to the tarmac, followed by 2 more identical vehicles. Airport security flanked the cars as several people in expensive suits stepped out, moving with the casual arrogance of those accustomed to having the world bend to their schedule. The gate agent, a young woman named Jessica according to her name tag, made another announcement with barely concealed frustration in her voice. Flight 2847 passengers, we're still waiting for our priority boarding to complete. We appreciate your patience during this extended delay. The word extended came out sharper than professional courtesy typically allowed, and I caught her rolling her eyes slightly as she set down the microphone. The businessman beside me had progressed from muttering to openly complaining to anyone within earshot about how this was exactly what was wrong with air travel today. I understood his frustration more than he could possibly know. During my tenure as regional operations director at 3 different airlines, I'd seen this scenario play out countless times. The VIP treatment, the delays, the assumption that regular passengers would simply accept whatever inconvenience was deemed necessary to accommodate those deemed more important. It was a symptom of an industry that had lost sight of basic respect for every customer who chose to fly. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Rebecca. Board meeting moved to 3:30 p.m. due to Hartwell's schedule conflict. You'll have extra time. I almost laughed at the timing. Thomas Hartwell, Pinnacle's CEO, was probably one of those suited figures I'd watched board our aircraft through the priority entrance. The same man whose operational philosophy I'd been specifically brought in to challenge was now inadvertently giving me a front row seat to witness exactly the kind of entitled behavior that was driving customers away from Pinnacle in record numbers. The mother with the 2 children approached Jessica's desk, her voice strained with the kind of polite desperation that comes from traveling alone with small kids. Excuse me, my daughter has a medical appointment we can't miss in Denver. Is there any way to know how much longer this will be? Jessica's expression softened as she looked at the little girl, maybe 6 years old, who was clutching a stuffed elephant and trying not to cry. I'm really sorry, ma'am. I don't have any additional information beyond what's been announced. These priority boardings can be unpredictable. The gate agent's helplessness was genuine, and I recognized the position she was in. She was the face of the airline to these frustrated passengers, but had no actual power to change anything about the situation. I closed my laptop and walked over to Jessica's desk, keeping my voice low. Is there a supervisor available who might have more information about the timeline? She looked at me with the tired expression of someone who'd fielded variations of this question for the past hour. Sir, I've already called my supervisor twice. The priority passengers are still in the boarding process, and we can't release the aircraft until they're settled. Her tone was professional but carried an undertone that suggested she was as frustrated as the rest of us. I know it's inconvenient, but there's really nothing more I can do right now. I nodded, understanding her position completely. She was following protocol, doing her job exactly as she'd been trained. The problem wasn't with Jessica or even with the ground crew. The problem was with a system that treated some customers as inherently more valuable than others, creating a hierarchy that inevitably led to exactly this kind of situation. By 9:15 a.m., we'd been delayed over an hour and 15 minutes. The gate area had taken on the familiar atmosphere of travel frustration, mixed with resignation. Some passengers had rebooked on later flights, others were making calls to rearrange meetings or appointments, and a few were demanding vouchers or compensation that Jessica clearly wasn't authorized to provide. The businessman who'd been complaining earlier was now on a heated phone call with what sounded like his company's travel department. I found myself studying the dynamics of the situation with the analytical mind that had served me well in operations management. This wasn't just a delay. It was a perfect case study in how operational decisions ripple through the customer experience. Every minute we sat at this gate represented not just inconvenience, but lost trust, damaged relationships, and the kind of negative word of mouth that spreads exponentially in our connected world. The mother with the 2 children was now visibly stressed, repeatedly checking her phone and trying to entertain her daughter, who had progressed from clutching her stuffed elephant to asking increasingly loud questions about when the airplane would start moving. Her son, maybe 8 years old, was slumped in his chair with the defeated posture of a kid whose day had been derailed by adult problems he couldn't understand or control. At 9:30, Jessica made another announcement that managed to be both apologetic and completely uninformative. Flight 2847 passengers, we're continuing to work with our priority boarding process and hope to begin general boarding shortly. Thank you for your continued patience. The collective groan from the waiting area was audible, and I watched several more passengers get up to join what was becoming a significant line at the rebooking counter. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the Pinnacle Airlines app, looking at the customer service ratings and recent reviews. The pattern was depressingly predictable. Complaint after complaint about delays, VIP treatment creating problems for regular passengers, and a general sense that the airline had lost touch with basic customer service principles. The irony that I was living through exactly the kind of experience that had prompted Pinnacle's board to bring me on was almost too perfect. My phone rang, and I saw it was Rebecca calling. "Marcus, I hope you're not caught up in any travel issues. The board meeting prep materials just came through, and there are some interesting developments I think you should know about before you walk into that room." Her voice carried the kind of urgency that usually meant something significant had shifted in the corporate landscape. "I'm actually experiencing some interesting developments myself," I said, glancing around at my fellow stranded passengers. "But yes, tell me what's happening on your end." Rebecca had been my assistant for 8 years, and her instincts for reading corporate undercurrents were nearly infallible. "Thomas Hartwell's been getting heat from the other board members about operational issues. Apparently, there was a major incident last week involving a delayed flight for VIP passengers that created a social media nightmare. The stock took a hit, and there's talk that today's meeting might be more contentious than originally planned." She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "The incident report mentions Flight 2847 from Chicago to Denver. Does that ring any bells?" I looked around the gate area, at Jessica still fielding complaints, at the mother now trying to calm her crying daughter, at the businessman who had escalated to demanding a refund for his entire ticket. "Rebecca, I think I'm sitting in the middle of next week's incident report right now." The realization hit me with perfect clarity. This wasn't just an inconvenient delay. This was exactly the kind of operational failure that had prompted Pinnacle's board to seek new leadership. I was watching in real time as the airline's priorities created the very problems I'd been hired to solve. The VIP passengers who had caused our delay were likely executives or major shareholders, people who would never experience the frustration currently radiating through this gate area because they'd never be on the receiving end of their own company's policies. At 9:45, something shifted in the energy around Jessica's desk. She was on the phone, nodding rapidly and scribbling notes. When she hung up, she immediately reached for the microphone with more purpose than she'd shown all morning. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an update on Flight 2847. We will begin boarding in approximately 10 minutes. I sincerely apologize for the extended delay and want to thank you for your patience." The collective sigh of relief was palpable, but I noticed Jessica's expression didn't match the good news she'd just delivered. Something in her demeanor suggested this resolution had come with complications. As passengers began gathering their belongings and forming the familiar pre-boarding clusters, I approached her desk once more. "Everything all right?" I asked quietly. "You look like someone who just got some mixed news." Jessica glanced around, then leaned slightly forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Between you and me, the priority passengers are furious about something, and it's rolling downhill fast. My supervisor just told me to prepare for potential complications during boarding." She straightened up as more passengers moved toward the desk, but I caught the worry in her eyes. The boarding process, when it finally began, was unlike anything I'd experienced in 15 years of frequent flying. The usual orderly groups were replaced by what felt more like controlled chaos. First-class passengers boarded with visible irritation, several making pointed comments to Jessica about the delay. Business class followed, but I noticed unusual activity near the jet bridge, with what appeared to be airline supervisors having intense conversations with ground crew. When my boarding group was called, I joined the line behind the mother and her 2 children. Her daughter had recovered from her earlier tears and was now excitedly chattering about the airplane. But her mother still carried the tension of someone whose carefully planned day had been thrown into disarray. As we moved down the jet bridge, I could hear raised voices coming from inside the aircraft. The scene that greeted us at the aircraft door was extraordinary. Captain Williams, according to his name tag, was standing in the galley area having what appeared to be a heated discussion with a flight attendant and someone in a pilot's uniform I didn't recognize. The conversation stopped abruptly as passengers began boarding, but the tension was unmistakable. I settled into my seat in row 12, an aisle seat that gave me a clear view of the first-class cabin where the delayed priority passengers were seated. The atmosphere up there was notably different from the resigned frustration that had characterized the gate area. These passengers carried themselves with the air of people accustomed to having their complaints taken seriously and their problems solved immediately. As more passengers boarded, I overheard fragments of conversations that painted a clearer picture of what had transpired. Apparently, the priority passengers had not just delayed our departure. They had demanded specific accommodations that had required crew changes, catering adjustments, and what one flight attendant quietly described to another as a complete operational overhaul. The mother and her children were seated 2 rows ahead of me, and I watched as she helped her daughter buckle her seatbelt and arrange her stuffed elephant for the flight. The little girl was now in full airplane excitement mode, pressing her face to the window and asking her mother a steady stream of questions about clouds and flying and whether the pilot was nice. At 10:20 a.m., Captain Williams finally appeared at the front of the cabin for the pre-flight announcement. His demeanor was professional, but I noticed the subtle signs of stress around his eyes and the slight tension in his voice as he began speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2847, with service to Denver International Airport. I want to personally apologize for our delayed departure this morning. We encountered some unexpected operational requirements that took longer to resolve than anticipated. He paused, and I caught him glancing toward the first-class cabin. We're now ready for departure, and expect to make up some time in the air. Our flight time today will be approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes. As Captain Williams disappeared back into the cockpit, I noticed several of the priority passengers in first class making phone calls, their voices carrying the tone of people reporting problems to supervisors or assistants. One man, silver-haired and wearing what appeared to be a very expensive watch, was speaking animatedly into his phone about unacceptable service standards and operational failures. The flight attendant, working the main cabin, a woman named Sandra, according to her name tag, moved through the aisles with the practiced efficiency of someone trying to recover from a difficult situation. She was particularly attentive to the families with children, offering extra snacks and coloring books, clearly trying to compensate for the morning's frustrations. As we finally pushed back from the gate at 10:35 a.m., nearly 2.5 hours behind schedule, I found myself reflecting on the morning's events with the perspective of someone who would soon be in a position to influence exactly these kinds of operational decisions. The delay had been frustrating, certainly, but more than that, it had been illuminating. I'd witnessed firsthand how Pinnacle's current operational philosophy created ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate inconvenience. The gate agent forced to deliver bad news without adequate information or authority to offer solutions. The families with children whose travel plans had been disrupted by decisions made without consideration for their needs. The regular passengers treated as an afterthought while VIP requirements took precedence. But I'd also seen something else. The genuine care and professionalism of frontline employees like Jessica and Sandra, who were doing their best to maintain service standards within a system that often worked against them. These were the people who bore the brunt of customer frustration while having little power to address the root causes of that frustration. As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, I opened my laptop and began making notes about the morning's experience. Not just the operational failures, but the human cost of those failures. The stress on Jessica's face as she delivered one inadequate update after another. The frustration in the businessman's voice as he tried to explain to his colleagues why he'd be late for a crucial meeting. The worry in the mother's eyes as she calculated whether they'd still make her daughter's medical appointment. These weren't just customer service metrics or operational statistics. These were real people whose days had been disrupted, whose trust in the airline had been damaged, and whose likelihood of choosing Pinnacle for future travel had been significantly diminished. Multiply this single incident by the dozens of similar situations that probably occurred across Pinnacle's network every day, and the scope of the problem became clear. My phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. Update on the board meeting. Hartwell is apparently dealing with a significant operational issue this morning. Word is that there was another VIP delay situation that's created some bad publicity. The board meeting might focus more heavily on operational reforms than originally planned. I almost smiled at the synchronicity. Thomas Hartwell was probably in that first-class cabin right now, making calls about the very operational issues that had caused our delay, completely unaware that the solution to those problems was sitting 12 rows behind him, taking detailed notes about the experience from a customer's perspective. As we reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign turned off, Sandra began the beverage service. When she reached my row, I noticed the fatigue in her eyes despite her professional smile. Coffee, sir? We also have juice, soft drinks, and complimentary snacks today. Coffee would be great, thank you. And Sandra, I added quietly, I wanted to say that you and your crew have handled a difficult situation this morning with real professionalism. I know it couldn't have been easy. Her smile shifted from professional to genuinely grateful. Thank you for saying that. It's been one of those days where everything that could go wrong seemed to happen at once. But we always try to take care of our passengers, no matter what challenges we're facing. She poured my coffee and moved on to the next row, but I caught her glancing back with a slightly puzzled expression, as if trying to place why a passenger might understand the operational challenges she'd faced. The irony of the situation continued to deepen as the flight progressed. Here I was, about to join the board of directors of an airline, having just experienced exactly the kind of customer service failure that exemplified everything wrong with the company's current approach. In a few hours, I'd be sitting in a boardroom discussing operational efficiency and customer satisfaction metrics, armed with fresh, first-hand experience of how those metrics translated into real-world passenger experiences. I spent the remainder of the flight reviewing the materials Rebecca had sent about Pinnacle's operational challenges, cross-referencing them with what I'd just experienced. The patterns were unmistakable. The airline had created a two-tiered system that prioritized short-term accommodation of high-value customers at the expense of operational reliability and broader customer satisfaction. As we began our descent into Denver, Captain Williams made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach into Denver International Airport. I want to thank you for your patience with this morning's departure delay, and I hope the remainder of your travel day goes smoothly. His tone carried a weariness that suggested this hadn't been his first challenging flight of the week. When we landed at Denver International Airport at 1:15 p.m., I watched the familiar post-flight ritual unfold with new eyes. The priority passengers in first class were the first to deplane, moving quickly and efficiently toward whatever important destinations awaited them. The rest of us followed in the usual order, but I noticed how many passengers were immediately on their phones, dealing with the cascading effects of our delayed arrival. The mother with the two children was gathering their belongings with the rushed efficiency of someone trying to make up lost time. Her daughter was still excited about the flight, chattering about the clouds they'd seen and asking when they could fly again, blissfully unaware of the stress her mother was managing. As I walked through the jet bridge, I found myself directly behind the silver-haired man from first class who'd been making phone calls earlier. He was on his phone again, and I couldn't help but overhear his conversation. The operational standards at this airline are completely unacceptable, he was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. We can't continue to allow these kinds of service failures to impact our business relationships. Something needs to change at the board level, and it needs to change immediately. I almost introduced myself right there in the jet bridge, but something held me back. Instead, I followed the stream of passengers into the terminal, my mind already shifting toward the afternoon's board meeting and the conversation I was about to have with Thomas Hartwell and the other directors. The Denver International Airport terminal stretched out before me, bustling with the usual mix of business travelers, families, and tourists. I found a quiet corner near my departure gate for the evening flight back to Chicago and pulled out my phone to call Rebecca. "How was your flight?" she asked immediately upon answering. "Educational," I replied, settling into an airport chair with a clear view of the departure boards. "Very educational. Is everything still on track for the 3:30 meeting?" "Yes, and Marcus, there's something else you should know. Thomas Hartwell specifically requested that today's agenda include a discussion of recent operational challenges and their impact on customer satisfaction. He mentioned wanting to hear perspectives on how the airline can better balance VIP services with overall operational efficiency." I looked around the airport terminal, watching travelers hurrying between gates, families managing luggage and children, business people juggling phone calls and laptops. These were Pinnacle's customers, the people whose experience of the airline would ultimately determine its success or failure. "Rebecca, I think I'm going to have quite a bit to contribute to that discussion." As I sat in the airport terminal reviewing my notes from the morning's experience, I realized that the delayed flight had given me something invaluable, a crystal clear understanding of the gap between Pinnacle's current operational philosophy and the kind of customer-focused approach that would be necessary to rebuild trust and loyalty. The businessman who'd complained throughout our delay walked past, still on his phone, now apparently rebooking his entire return journey due to the missed connections caused by our delayed departure. The mother with the 2 children was at a nearby gate, her daughter sleeping against her shoulder while she made what sounded like apologetic phone calls about their late arrival. These were the hidden costs of operational decisions made in boardrooms, costs that rarely appeared on quarterly reports but that accumulated over time into damaged relationships, lost customers, and ultimately, reduced profitability. Thomas Hartwell glanced around the table, clearly aware that the board was looking for decisive leadership in response to the operational challenges we'd been discussing. I think we need to acknowledge that this morning's incident represents a broader pattern of operational issues that require systematic attention. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I propose that we establish a task force to comprehensively review our VIP service procedures and develop new policies that maintain high service standards without compromising operational reliability. I'd like to ask Marcus to chair that task force, given his unique perspective on both the operational and customer experience aspects of these challenges. I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. This was exactly the kind of opportunity I had hoped for when I accepted the board position, the chance to influence real operational change based on clear evidence and systematic analysis. I'd be honored to take on that responsibility, I replied. I think we can develop solutions that actually improve service for all passengers, including our VIP customers, while strengthening our operational performance. Dr. Williams looked up from her financial analysis. What timeline are we looking at for this review and implementation of new procedures? Given the urgency created by incidents like this morning's, I replied, I think we should aim for initial recommendations within 60 days and full implementation within 6 months. The longer we wait to address these issues, the more damage we do to our customer relationships and our competitive position. Robert Martinez was clearly thinking through the broader implications of what we were discussing. Marcus, are you confident that frontline employees will support the kind of changes you're proposing? Sometimes operational reforms can create resistance if they're not implemented carefully. That's an excellent point, I acknowledged. Based on my observations this morning, I believe frontline employees are actually eager for changes that give them better tools and clearer authority to provide good customer service. The gate agent and flight attendants I interacted with were clearly frustrated by their inability to address passenger concerns effectively. I thought back to Jessica's expression as she delivered one inadequate update after another, and Sandra's gratitude when I acknowledged the difficult situation she was managing. The people who interact with customers every day understand these problems better than anyone. They should be our primary partners in developing solutions. Margaret Chen was taking notes as we discussed implementation strategies. It sounds like we have consensus around the need for systematic operational reforms and Marcus's leadership of a comprehensive review process. Are there any other immediate actions we should consider in response to this morning's incident? Thomas Hartwell had been reviewing the media monitoring reports during our discussion. I think we need to address the public relations impact immediately. We should issue a statement acknowledging the service failure and committing to systematic improvements. I agree, I said. But I think our statement should go beyond the usual corporate apology. We should acknowledge the specific ways we failed our customers and outline concrete steps we're taking to prevent similar incidents in the future. Linda Foster looked up from her customer feedback analysis. The passengers who experienced this morning's delay are going to be watching very closely to see how we respond. This is an opportunity to demonstrate that we actually listen to customer feedback and take it seriously. I realized that this was a perfect opportunity to bridge the gap between corporate response and customer experience. I'd like to suggest that we personally reach out to every passenger who was affected by this morning's delay. Not just a form letter, but a genuine acknowledgement of the impact on their travel plans, and a concrete gesture that demonstrates our commitment to better service. Dr. Williams was clearly intrigued by this suggestion. What kind of gesture are you thinking about? Travel vouchers are standard, but they don't really address the underlying trust issue, I replied. I think we should offer each affected passenger a personal conversation with a senior airline representative to discuss their experience and our improvement plans. Show them that their feedback matters and that we're serious about change. Thomas Hartwell was clearly considering the implications of such an unprecedented customer outreach effort. That would be a significant commitment of time and resources. It would, I agreed. But it would also be a powerful demonstration that we understand the difference between managing a crisis and actually addressing the underlying problems that created the crisis. Margaret Chen looked around the table, clearly ready to establish concrete next steps. I think we have a clear path forward. Marcus will chair a comprehensive review of our VIP service procedures with a goal of developing new policies that maintain service excellence without compromising operational reliability. Thomas will coordinate immediate crisis response, including public statements and customer outreach. And the full board will receive regular updates on progress towards systematic operational improvements. As the meeting began to wind down, I reflected on the extraordinary morning I'd experienced. I had started the day as a frustrated passenger experiencing exactly the kind of operational dysfunction that plagues modern air travel. I was ending it as the newly appointed leader of an initiative to systematically address those problems at one of the industry's major airlines. The irony was perfect, but more than that, it was instructive. The disconnect between Pinnacle's corporate decision-making and its customer reality was exactly the kind of problem that could only be addressed by people who understood both perspectives. As the board members began gathering their materials and preparing to leave, Thomas Hartwell approached me with an expression that mixed professional respect with something that might have been embarrassment. Marcus, I have to say that your presentation today has given me a completely different perspective on this morning's incident. I've been thinking about these operational challenges primarily in terms of logistics and cost management, but you've helped me understand the human impact in a way that our standard reporting procedures simply don't capture. I appreciated his willingness to acknowledge the limitations of the corporate perspective he'd been operating from. Thomas, I think that disconnect between operational decision-making and customer experience is one of the biggest challenges facing airlines today. The people making policy decisions rarely experience the consequences of those decisions as customers. He nodded thoughtfully. Your point about frontline employees being frustrated by their inability to address customer concerns effectively really resonates with me. I've been hearing complaints from gate agents and flight attendants about inadequate authority and information, but I hadn't connected those complaints to incidents like this morning's delay. The people who interact with customers every day are our best source of intelligence about what's actually happening in our operations, I replied. If we're going to develop effective solutions, we need to start by listening to them. As we walked toward the elevator together, Thomas continued the conversation. I'm curious about your perspective on the VIP passengers who caused this morning's delay. Do you think they understood the impact their requirements had on other travelers? I thought about the silver-haired man I'd observed making phone calls about unacceptable service standards, while being completely unaware that he had been part of creating exactly the kind of service failure he was complaining about. I think most VIP passengers operate in a bubble where they're insulated from the consequences of their special requirements, I replied. They experience smooth, efficient service that meets their expectations, so they have no reason to consider how that service is being provided or what impact it might have on other customers. The elevator arrived, and as we stepped inside, Thomas asked the question I had been hoping he would ask. So how do we provide exceptional service to high-value customers without creating the kind of operational problems we saw this morning? We stopped treating customer service as a zero-sum game, I replied. The best VIP services are those that enhance the experience for preferred customers without degrading the experience for anyone else. Exclusive lounges, priority check-in, upgraded seating, personalized attention. All of these can be provided without making other passengers wait or feel like second-class citizens. As we reached the lobby, I realized that the conversation we'd been having in the elevator was exactly the kind of operational thinking that would be necessary to transform Pinnacle's approach to customer service. Thomas was clearly capable of understanding the strategic implications of operational changes. He just needed a framework for thinking about customer experience in terms that went beyond immediate cost-benefit analysis. Marcus, I'm looking forward to working with you on this task force, he said as we shook hands. I think your perspective is exactly what Pinnacle needs right now. As I walked out of Pinnacle's corporate headquarters and back into the Denver afternoon, I felt a profound sense of purpose and anticipation. The morning's frustrating flight delay had transformed into an opportunity to influence real change in how a major airline thinks about customer service and operational excellence. The taxi ride back to the airport gave me time to reflect on the extraordinary day I'd experienced. I had begun as a passenger frustrated by operational dysfunction, and ended as the leader of an initiative to systematically address the root causes of that dysfunction. But more than that, I had gained something invaluable: a complete understanding of the gap between corporate intention and customer reality in modern air travel. The board meeting had demonstrated that Pinnacle's leadership was genuinely committed to operational improvement, but they had been operating without adequate understanding of how their decisions affected actual passengers. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. How did the meeting go? The media attention around this morning's flight delay is intensifying, and there are already calls for congressional hearings on airline customer service standards. I smiled as I typed my response. The meeting went very well. We're going to turn this crisis into an opportunity for real operational transformation. And Rebecca, I think you're going to be very busy over the next few months, coordinating what's going to be the most comprehensive customer service reform initiative in Pinnacle's history. As my taxi pulled up to Denver International Airport for my evening flight back to Chicago, I realized that I was about to experience Pinnacle's customer service from an entirely new perspective. I was no longer just a passenger. I was now part of the leadership team responsible for ensuring that every aspect of the travel experience reflected the airline's commitment to operational excellence and customer respect. The irony of my situation continued to deepen as I walked through the terminal toward my departure gate. This morning, I had been a frustrated customer experiencing the consequences of Pinnacle's operational priorities. Tonight, I was returning home as the person responsible for ensuring that future passengers would have fundamentally different experiences. The gate area for my flight back to Chicago was notably different from the chaos I'd experienced that morning. Passengers were boarding efficiently, families with children were being accommodated smoothly, and the gate agents appeared to have adequate information and authority to address passenger questions. It was a reminder that good airline operations were absolutely possible when the right priorities and procedures were in place. As I settled into my seat for the flight home, I opened my laptop and began outlining the comprehensive operational review that would define my first major initiative as a Pinnacle board member. The morning's delay had given me more than just frustration, it had given me a roadmap for transformation. 3 weeks after that transformative board meeting, I found myself standing in the employee break room of Pinnacle's Chicago Operations Center at 5:30 a.m., sharing coffee and donuts with gate agents, baggage handlers, and customer service representatives who were about to start their shifts. This wasn't a typical board member activity, but nothing about my approach to the VIP service reform initiative was following typical corporate playbooks. So you're telling me that you were actually on that delayed flight that's been all over the news? Asked Maria Santos, a gate agent with 12 years of experience at Pinnacle. She was stirring cream into her coffee with the practiced efficiency of someone who had mastered the art of quick breaks between flights. The one where those VIP passengers caused a 2-hour delay? I confirmed, taking a bite of a chocolate-glazed donut that reminded me why airport food had such a terrible reputation. Seat 47B, and I experienced every minute of frustration that our passengers go through when our operational priorities create these kinds of situations. The group of employees gathered around the break room table represented exactly the perspectives I needed to understand if the task force was going to develop meaningful solutions. These were the people who dealt with angry passengers, who tried to explain delays they didn't fully understand, and who bore the brunt of customer frustration created by decisions made in corporate boardrooms. The thing that kills me, said David Kim, a customer service supervisor, is that we always know when these VIP situations are going to create problems, but we don't have any authority to push back or suggest alternatives. We just have to smile and deal with whatever chaos gets created. As the employees dispersed to begin their workday, I remained in the break room, reviewing my notes and reflecting on how their insights aligned with the systematic changes I was developing for the task force. These conversations confirmed that the operational problems weren't due to employee incompetence or lack of commitment to customer service. They were the inevitable result of policies that prioritized accommodation over accountability, and left frontline staff to manage situations they had no power to actually resolve. My phone buzzed with a call from Rebecca. "Marcus, I have updates on the media response to Pinnacle's statement about operational reforms, and there are some interesting developments you should know about." I walked out of the operations center into the early morning air of Chicago's aviation district. "Tell me what's happening." The statement acknowledging the service failure and committing to systematic improvements has generated significant positive coverage, she reported. "But more importantly, we're getting direct responses from passengers who were on that delayed flight. They want to take advantage of the personal conversation offer you suggested." This was exactly what I had hoped would happen. How many passengers have reached out, and what are they saying? 43 so far, which is about a third of the affected passengers. They're not just looking for compensation. They want to understand what changes are actually being implemented to prevent similar situations. Several have specific suggestions based on their travel experiences with other airlines. I found myself smiling as I walked toward my rental car. "Rebecca, this is perfect. These passenger conversations are going to give us invaluable insight into customer expectations and practical solutions. Can you coordinate scheduling these conversations over the next 2 weeks?" "Already working on it." "But Marcus, there's something else. Thomas Hartwell wants to sit in on some of these passenger conversations. He says your presentation at the board meeting opened his eyes to the customer perspective in a way he hadn't expected, and he wants to hear directly from affected passengers." The fact that Pinnacle's CEO was willing to personally engage with customers who had experienced service failures was encouraging. It suggested a level of commitment to understanding customer perspectives that went beyond typical corporate crisis management. "Set up a meeting with Thomas for this afternoon," I said, unlocking my car. "I want to discuss how we structure these passenger conversations to maximize their value for both customer relations and operational learning." The drive back to my hotel gave me time to review the comprehensive reform plan that was taking shape based on 3 weeks of intensive research, employee interviews, and operational analysis. The VIP Service Task Force had evolved into something much more ambitious, a complete reimagining of how Pinnacle balanced exceptional service for high-value customers with operational reliability for everyone else. The core insight that had emerged from all of this analysis was surprisingly simple. The best customer service creates value for all customers, not just for those willing to pay premium prices. Airlines that had successfully implemented VIP services without compromising operational reliability had done so by developing service enhancements that didn't require other passengers to wait, experience inconvenience, or feel like second-class citizens. My hotel room had become an impromptu command center for the reform initiative, with whiteboards covered in operational flowcharts, customer journey maps, and implementation timelines. I had been working with a small team of operational experts, customer experience consultants, and technology specialists to develop solutions that addressed the root causes of incidents like my delayed flight, rather than just managing their symptoms. The centerpiece of our recommendations was a fundamental shift from reactive accommodation to proactive service design. Instead of saying yes to every special request and then scrambling to implement it, Pinnacle would establish clear service standards that could be consistently delivered while offering premium enhancements that didn't compromise those standards. For example, VIP passengers who wanted priority boarding could be accommodated through exclusive pre-boarding lounges connected directly to aircraft, eliminating the need to delay regular passengers. High-value customers who required schedule flexibility could be offered guaranteed rebooking on the next available flight rather than holding up departures for late arrivals. Premium passengers who wanted personalized attention could receive dedicated crew members without reducing service levels for other travelers. Each solution was designed to enhance the VIP experience while actually improving operational efficiency and customer satisfaction across all passenger segments. It was a win-win-win approach that created value for premium customers, regular passengers, and the airline's operational performance. My afternoon meeting with Thomas Hartwell took place in his office on the 36th floor of Pinnacle's headquarters, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Denver's skyline and the mountains beyond. He had reviewed the preliminary recommendations from the task force and was clearly engaged with the strategic implications of what we were proposing. "Marcus, I have to admit that when I first agreed to this comprehensive review, I was thinking primarily in terms of policy adjustments and procedural improvements. He began, gesturing toward the detailed implementation plans spread across his conference table. But what you're describing is a fundamental transformation of how we think about customer service and operational excellence. That's exactly right, I replied, pointing to the customer journey maps that illustrated how the proposed changes would affect different types of passengers. We can't solve operational problems with operational solutions alone. We have to address the underlying philosophy that creates those problems in the first place. Thomas was studying a flowchart that showed how VIP accommodation requests would be handled under the new procedures. Walk me through a specific scenario. Let's say we have a high-value customer who needs to make a last-minute schedule change that would normally require delaying a flight for late boarding. I opened my laptop and pulled up a detailed case study we had developed based on exactly that scenario. Under the current system, we would hold the aircraft, delay all other passengers, and create the kind of operational disruption we experienced 3 weeks ago. Under the proposed system, that customer would be guaranteed space on the next available flight with upgrade to first class, lounge access during the wait, ground transportation coordination, and personal assistance with any schedule adjustments needed for their destination. So instead of making 127 passengers wait for one late traveler, we provide that traveler with superior service that doesn't impact anyone else's schedule, Thomas said, clearly following the logic. Exactly. And in many cases, the alternative service is actually better from the customer's perspective. A guaranteed first-class seat on the next flight with personalized assistance is often preferable to rushing to make a departure that's already been delayed. Thomas was clearly intrigued by the strategic possibilities this approach offered. What about the financial implications? Are we talking about increased costs for alternative services, or do the operational efficiencies offset those expenses? I had been hoping he would ask about the economics of the proposed changes. Our financial analysis suggests that the operational efficiencies and customer retention benefits significantly outweigh the costs of enhanced alternative services. When you factor in the lost revenue from passengers who choose competitors due to service reliability issues, plus the cost of managing operational disruptions and negative publicity, the current approach is actually much more expensive than the systematic improvements we're proposing. I clicked to a spreadsheet that showed detailed cost-benefit projections based on historical operational data and customer behavior analysis. The incident that brought us together 3 weeks ago probably cost Pinnacle more in lost customer loyalty and negative publicity than we would spend providing enhanced alternative services to VIP customers for an entire month. Thomas spent several minutes reviewing the financial projections, asking detailed questions about assumptions and methodologies. His engagement with the economic analysis was encouraging, suggesting that he understood the business case for operational transformation extended well beyond customer satisfaction metrics. The numbers are compelling, he acknowledged, but I'm curious about implementation challenges. We're talking about changing established procedures, retraining staff, and potentially significant technology upgrades. How do we manage that transition without creating new operational problems? That's where the passenger conversations I mentioned become crucial, I replied. We're not just implementing changes and hoping they work. We're developing solutions in partnership with the customers who have experienced our current operational failures, and we're testing improvements with the employees who will be responsible for implementing them. I showed him the preliminary feedback we had received from passenger conversations conducted over the past week. The responses were remarkably consistent. Customers wanted reliable service, transparent communication, and respectful treatment more than they wanted elaborate amenities or special privileges. One passenger told me that she would gladly pay extra for guaranteed on-time performance, I explained. Another said that honest communication about delays was more important to him than free snacks or drink vouchers. These insights are helping us focus our improvements on what actually matters to customers, rather than what we assume they want. Thomas was clearly processing the implications of this customer-driven approach to service design. So instead of developing solutions in isolation and then trying to sell them to customers, we're involving customers in the development process to ensure we're addressing their actual priorities. Exactly. And we're doing the same thing with employees. The gate agents and flight attendants who deal with these situations every day have invaluable insights into what works and what doesn't. They're our partners in developing practical solutions, not just the people who implement policies created by others. Our conversation was interrupted by Thomas's assistant, who informed us that Margaret Chen had arrived for a scheduled update on the task force progress. The board chair entered with the focused energy of someone who had been closely monitoring the reform initiative and was eager to hear about concrete developments. "Thomas, Marcus, I hope you don't mind my joining this discussion," she said, settling into a chair across from the conference table where we had spread our implementation materials. "The board is very interested in understanding how the operational reforms are progressing, especially given the continued media attention around customer service issues in the airline industry." I welcomed the opportunity to update Margaret on the task force findings, particularly since the scope of our recommendations had expanded significantly beyond the original VIP service review. "Margaret, we've discovered that the operational challenges we initially identified around VIP accommodations are symptoms of broader systemic issues that require comprehensive solutions." I spent the next 30 minutes walking her through the detailed analysis we had conducted, the employee and customer insights that had informed our recommendations, and the implementation strategy we had developed for rolling out systematic changes across Pinnacle's operations. "The fundamental insight," I explained, "is that exceptional customer service and operational reliability are not competing priorities. When done correctly, they reinforce each other to create competitive advantages that benefit everyone: customers, employees, and shareholders." Margaret was clearly engaged with the strategic implications of what we were proposing. "Marcus, this sounds like exactly the kind of operational transformation that Pinnacle needs to strengthen our competitive position. But I'm curious about timeline and resource requirements. How quickly can we begin implementing these changes, and what kind of investment are we looking at?" "We can begin pilot testing immediately in select markets," I replied, referring to the detailed implementation plan we had developed. Chicago, Denver, and Seattle would be ideal test locations because they represent different operational challenges and customer demographics. Full system implementation could be completed within 12 months, with measurable improvements visible within the first quarter. Thomas had been reviewing financial projections while I discussed implementation timelines. "The investment requirements are substantial but manageable," he added. "And the projected return on investment, both in terms of customer retention and operational efficiency, makes this a compelling business proposition." Margaret was clearly satisfied with the strategic direction and financial viability of the proposed reforms. "I think we're ready to present this to the full board for approval. Marcus, would you be prepared to make a comprehensive presentation at next week's board meeting?" "Absolutely," I replied, feeling the anticipation that came with approaching a major milestone in the reform initiative. "I'd like to include some of the passengers we've spoken with in that presentation if possible. Their direct testimony about the impact of operational improvements would be powerful." "That's an excellent idea," Margaret agreed. Nothing speaks to the value of customer service reforms like hearing directly from the customers who have experienced both the problems and the solutions. As our meeting concluded, I realized that the comprehensive operational transformation we had developed over the past 3 weeks represented something much more significant than policy adjustments or procedural improvements. We were proposing a fundamental shift in how Pinnacle understood its relationship with customers and its responsibility for creating value through service excellence. The evening flight back to Chicago gave me time to reflect on the extraordinary trajectory that had brought me from frustrated passenger to architect of airline industry reform in less than a month. The delayed flight that had initially seemed like just another travel inconvenience had become the catalyst for systematic changes that could influence how airlines across the industry thought about customer service and operational excellence. But more than that, the experience had demonstrated the power of bridging different perspectives to create solutions that addressed real problems rather than just managing their symptoms. The corporate boardroom view of operational challenges was incomplete without understanding the customer experience of those challenges. The frontline employee perspective on service delivery was essential for developing practical solutions. The customer voice was crucial for defining what actually constituted value and satisfaction. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca as we began our descent into Chicago. "Marcus, we've now heard from 68 passengers who were on that delayed flight. The response to our outreach efforts has been overwhelmingly positive, and several passengers have specifically asked to participate in the board presentation next week." I smiled as I typed my response. Rebecca, I think we're about to demonstrate something that the airline industry desperately needs to learn. That customers who are treated with respect and given genuine opportunities to contribute to improvements become the most powerful advocates for the companies that listen to them. The taxi ride from O'Hare to my apartment gave me a final opportunity to review the materials we would be presenting to Pinnacle's board the following week. The comprehensive reform package represented thousands of hours of analysis, hundreds of employee and customer conversations, and a fundamental reimagining of what exceptional airline service could look like. But at its core, the proposal was remarkably simple. Treat every customer with respect, provide reliable service that meets clearly communicated standards, and create premium experiences that enhance value rather than extracting it from other passengers' experiences. The next morning, I woke up to discover that Pinnacle's stock price had risen 3% overnight, driven by positive analyst coverage of the company's commitment to operational reforms and customer service improvements. The financial markets were responding favorably to the strategic direction we had established, even before the comprehensive changes had been implemented. More importantly, my email inbox contained messages from 12 additional passengers who had been on that delayed flight 3 weeks earlier, all expressing appreciation for Pinnacle's follow-up and interest in participating in the reform process. The customer engagement strategy was creating exactly the kind of loyalty and advocacy that we had projected in our financial models. I spent the morning preparing for what promised to be the most significant board presentation of my career. The materials we had developed told a complete story. From the operational dysfunction that had created unnecessary customer frustration, through the systematic analysis that had identified root causes and practical solutions, to the comprehensive reform package that would position Pinnacle as an industry leader in customer service excellence. But the most powerful element of our presentation would be the voices of the customers and employees who had directly experienced both the problems and the emerging solutions. Their testimony would demonstrate that operational excellence and customer satisfaction were not abstract corporate goals but practical achievements that created real value for real people. The week leading up to the board presentation was filled with final preparations, coordination meetings, and last-minute refinements to our recommendations. But I also made time for something equally important: several more early morning visits to Pinnacle's operational facilities, continuing the conversations with frontline employees that had been so crucial to developing practical solutions. So you're really going to recommend that gate agents have authority to offer immediate compensation for delays without going through corporate approval? Asked Maria Santos during one of these informal focus groups. Not just recommend it, I replied. We're going to demonstrate that empowering frontline employees to address customer concerns immediately actually reduces costs while improving satisfaction. The current system of escalating everything through corporate channels creates more problems than it solves. The enthusiasm I saw in Maria's eyes, and in the expressions of her colleagues, reminded me why this reform initiative was about much more than corporate policy changes. It was about creating working conditions that allowed dedicated employees to provide the kind of service they wanted to provide, while giving customers the kind of experience they deserve to receive. On Friday afternoon, the day before the board presentation, I received a call that perfectly encapsulated the transformation we were trying to achieve. It was from Jennifer Walsh, the flight attendant who had participated in one of my early employee focus groups. Marcus, I wanted to tell you about something that happened on my flight yesterday, she began, her voice carrying genuine excitement. We had a VIP passenger who arrived late and wanted us to hold the departure. Instead of automatically accommodating the request, my supervisor asked about alternatives that wouldn't delay other passengers. I found myself leaning forward, eager to hear how the situation had been resolved. What happened? We offered the passenger confirmed space on the next flight with upgrade to first class, plus lounge access and ground transportation coordination. Not only did he accept the alternative, he told me it was the best customer service experience he'd ever had with an airline. He said he felt like we had actually listened to his needs and provided a better solution than what he had originally requested. This was exactly the kind of outcome we had projected in our recommendations. VIP customers receiving superior service that didn't compromise operational reliability or create negative experiences for other passengers. Jennifer, that's a perfect example of how operational excellence and customer satisfaction reinforce each other when the system is designed correctly, I replied. Thank you for sharing that story. It's going to be part of tomorrow's board presentation. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the comprehensive reform package we would be presenting the next day was no longer just theoretical recommendations and financial projections. It was a practical framework that was already beginning to demonstrate its value through real operational improvements and genuine customer satisfaction. The transformation that had begun with a frustrated passenger experience on a delayed flight was evolving into systematic changes that could influence how the entire airline industry thought about the relationship between operational excellence and customer service. And at the center of it all was a simple recognition: the best solutions emerge when companies genuinely listen to the people who experience their services every day, both as customers and as employees. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Denver's skyline look particularly impressive from the 34th floor of Pinnacle's headquarters. I stood at the boardroom windows, reviewing my presentation notes one final time while watching aircraft take off and land at the distant airport. In 30 minutes, I would begin the most important presentation of my career, outlining a comprehensive transformation that could position Pinnacle Airlines as an industry leader in customer service excellence, while improving operational efficiency and financial performance. The irony that this opportunity had emerged from what initially seemed like just another travel frustration was not lost on me. But more than irony, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The delayed flight that had brought me together with Thomas Hartwell and this reform opportunity represented something much more significant than coincidence. It was a demonstration of how customer experiences, when genuinely understood and systematically addressed, could become the foundation for operational excellence that benefited everyone: passengers, employees, and shareholders alike. The comprehensive reform package we had developed over the past month represented thousands of hours of analysis, hundreds of conversations with customers and employees, and a fundamental reimagining of what exceptional airline service could look like in practice, rather than just in corporate mission statements. As the board members began arriving for what promised to be a watershed moment in Pinnacle's operational evolution, I felt confident that we were about to demonstrate something the airline industry desperately needed to learn: that the best customer service creates value for everyone, and that operational excellence emerges naturally when companies design their systems around respect for every person who chooses to fly with them. The boardroom filled with an energy I hadn't felt since my first presentation 4 weeks earlier. This time, however, I wasn't sitting across from skeptical executives trying to understand an operational crisis. I was standing before a group of leaders who had witnessed the transformation of a customer service disaster into a comprehensive blueprint for industry excellence. Margaret Chin called the meeting to order at precisely 9 a.m., her expression carrying the focused intensity of someone who understood the significance of the decisions about to be made. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're here to review the final recommendations from Marcus Williams and the VIP Service Reform Task Force. Over the past month, this initiative has evolved into something far more comprehensive than any of us originally anticipated. I stood at the front of the room, my presentation materials arranged on the conference table, but more importantly, I had something no corporate report could provide: 3 passengers from that original delayed flight, each representing a different perspective on how operational improvements could transform the airline industry. Before we begin with the formal recommendations, I said, gesturing toward the 3 individuals seated at the side of the boardroom, I'd like you to hear directly from the people whose experiences sparked this entire initiative. The first to speak was Sarah Chen, the mother who had been traveling with her 2 young children to Denver for her daughter's medical appointment. She stood with the composed confidence of someone who had thought carefully about what she wanted to say. 4 weeks ago, I was one of the frustrated passengers on Flight 2847, she began, her voice clear and measured. My daughter had a specialist appointment that we'd been waiting months for, and the 2-hour delay nearly caused us to miss it entirely. But what happened afterward changed my entire perception of what customer service could be. She paused, looking around the boardroom at faces that were clearly engaged with her perspective. When Pinnacle reached out to personally discuss my experience, I expected the usual corporate apology and maybe a travel voucher. Instead, I had a genuine conversation with Marcus about how airlines could better serve families traveling with children. My suggestions about dedicated family boarding areas and medical appointment priority rebooking weren't just acknowledged, they became part of the operational improvements I've since experienced on 3 additional flights with Pinnacle. Thomas Hartwell was taking detailed notes as Sarah continued. The most important thing for me as a customer is knowing that an airline understands the reality of traveling with children and has systems in place to handle unexpected situations with transparency and practical solutions. Pinnacle has become that airline for my family. The second speaker was Robert Martinez, the businessman whose client meeting had been disrupted by the original delay. He represented the corporate traveler segment that airlines often assumed cared primarily about premium amenities and preferential treatment. My initial reaction to that delayed flight was anger and frustration, he admitted. I had spent weeks preparing for a crucial presentation, and the delay threatened to derail an important business opportunity. But the follow-up conversation I had with Marcus's team revealed something I hadn't considered: how my demands for special accommodation as a frequent flyer often created the very operational problems that led to delays, like the one I experienced. He stood and walked toward the presentation screen, where operational flowcharts illustrated the new VIP service procedures. The alternative services that Pinnacle has developed actually provide better customer experiences than the old system of holding flights for late passengers. Guaranteed rebooking with upgraded seating, ground transportation coordination, and personal assistance with schedule adjustments create more value than making other passengers wait. Robert's testimony was particularly powerful because it came from someone who had initially been critical of any changes that might reduce traditional VIP privileges. I've now experienced the new procedures 3 times, and each time the service was superior to what I would have received under the old system. More importantly, I never had to worry that my travel requirements were creating problems for other passengers. The third speaker was David Kim, the customer service supervisor I had met during my early morning visits to Pinnacle's operations center. He represented the employee perspective that had been crucial to developing practical solutions. As someone who has worked in airline customer service for 15 years, I can tell you that the changes Marcus has championed represent the most significant operational improvement I've ever experienced, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who dealt with customer service challenges every day. David pulled up examples on his tablet of customer feedback from the past month. Under the old system, I spent most of my time explaining delays I didn't understand and apologizing for problems I couldn't solve. The new procedures give me the information and authority I need to actually help customers, which is why most of us chose to work in customer service in the first place. He clicked to specific metrics that demonstrated the impact of the operational changes. Customer satisfaction scores in our pilot locations have increased by 37%, while customer complaints have decreased by 62%. But more importantly, employee satisfaction has improved dramatically because we can now provide the kind of service we've always wanted to provide. After the customer and employee testimonials, I presented the comprehensive data analysis that supported full system implementation of the operational reforms. The financial projections were compelling: increased customer retention, improved operational efficiency, and enhanced brand reputation that translated directly into competitive advantages and revenue growth. The pilot program results exceed our most optimistic projections, I explained, displaying metrics from the Chicago, Denver, and Seattle test markets. On-time performance has improved by 18%, customer complaints have decreased by 55%, and most significantly, customer loyalty scores have reached the highest levels in Pinnacle's history. Margaret Chen was clearly impressed by the systematic nature of the improvements. Marcus, these results suggest that operational excellence and customer satisfaction are not just compatible goals. They actually reinforce each other when implemented correctly. Exactly, I replied. The traditional airline industry assumption that exceptional service for some customers requires inferior service for others has been proven false. The best customer service creates value for everyone. Dr. Williams had been reviewing the financial analysis throughout my presentation. The return on investment projections are remarkable, she noted. Not only are we improving customer experiences, we're doing so in a way that enhances profitability through operational efficiency and increased customer loyalty. Thomas Hartwell stood to address the board, his expression carrying the conviction of someone who had personally witnessed the transformation from crisis to opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, 4 weeks ago we were dealing with a public relations disaster created by our own operational priorities. Today, we have the opportunity to position Pinnacle as the industry leader in customer service excellence. He gestured toward the comprehensive implementation plan displayed on the conference room screens. Marcus has developed something extraordinary. A systematic approach to operational excellence that creates competitive advantages while genuinely improving the travel experience for every passenger who chooses to fly with us. The board discussion that followed was unlike any corporate decision-making process I had previously experienced. Instead of focusing primarily on cost considerations and risk management, the conversation centered on the strategic opportunities created by operational excellence and the competitive advantages of genuine customer service leadership. Robert Martinez, the board member with logistics expertise, raised important questions about implementation timelines and resource requirements. Marcus, you're proposing the most comprehensive operational transformation in Pinnacle's history. How do we manage this transition without creating new operational problems during the changeover period? The pilot program has given us a proven methodology for systematic implementation, I replied, referring to detailed transition plans we had developed. We roll out changes in phases, with extensive employee training and customer communication at each stage. The improvements are designed to enhance existing operations rather than replace them entirely. Linda Foster, whose background was in customer experience consulting, was particularly interested in the long-term implications of the operational changes. These reforms represent a fundamental shift in how airlines think about customer relationships. Do you believe other carriers will adopt similar approaches? I believe they'll have to, I answered. The competitive advantages created by genuine operational excellence are too significant to ignore. Airlines that continue treating customer service as a zero-sum game will find themselves at an increasingly severe disadvantage. The formal vote to approve full system implementation was unanimous. But more important than the procedural decision was the commitment I heard from each board member to support the cultural transformation that would be necessary for long-term success. Margaret Chen summarized the board's decision with the kind of clear leadership that had made her an effective board chair. Pinnacle Airlines will implement the comprehensive operational reforms developed by Marcus Williams and the VIP Service Reform Task Force. This represents our commitment to operational excellence, customer service leadership, and the kind of systematic improvement that creates value for passengers, employees, and shareholders. 6 months later, I stood in the same Denver International Airport terminal where my journey had begun. But this time, I was there for the celebration of Pinnacle's industry recognition as Airline of the Year for customer service excellence. The transformation that had started with a delayed flight had evolved into systematic changes that influenced how the entire industry thought about operational priorities and customer relationships. The gate area where I had once waited in frustration was now equipped with the family boarding areas that Sarah Chen had suggested, along with real-time communication systems that kept passengers informed about actual departure times rather than optimistic estimates. The VIP services that had once created operational chaos were now seamlessly integrated into procedures that enhanced premium experiences without compromising service for other passengers. Maria Santos, the gate agent who had become one of my most valuable advisors during the reform development, approached me with a smile that reflected genuine job satisfaction. Marcus, I wanted to thank you for something I never thought I'd experience in airline customer service. Passengers actually thanking me for the service they receive instead of complaining about problems I can't solve. The awards ceremony that evening brought together airline industry leaders, customer service experts, and government officials who were interested in understanding how operational excellence could be achieved without sacrificing profitability. But the most meaningful recognition came from the passengers whose travel experiences had been fundamentally improved by the systematic changes we had implemented. Thomas Hartwell delivered the keynote address, describing Pinnacle's transformation from operational crisis to industry leadership. 18 months ago, we were managing customer service disasters created by our own policies, he began. Today, we're demonstrating that operational excellence and customer satisfaction are not competing priorities. They're complementary strategies that create sustainable competitive advantages. He gestured toward me in the audience. This transformation began when Marcus Williams experienced our operational failures as a customer, and then used that insight to develop solutions that addressed root causes rather than managing symptoms. The lesson for our industry is clear. The best improvements come from genuinely listening to the people who experience our services every day. The evening concluded with something I had never expected when I first walked into that boardroom 8 months earlier. Passengers, employees, and industry leaders working together to develop the next generation of customer service innovations. The delayed flight that had initially seemed like just another travel inconvenience had become the catalyst for systematic changes that continued to evolve and improve. As I prepared to board my flight home to Chicago, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me from frustrated passenger to industry leader in customer service reform. The experience had demonstrated something profound about the relationship between individual experiences and systematic change. When companies genuinely listen to their customers and empower their employees to create solutions, the results can transform entire industries. The flight attendant who greeted me at the aircraft door was Jennifer Walsh, the same crew member who had participated in my early employee focus groups and who had since become a supervisor responsible for training other flight attendants in the new customer service procedures. "Marcus, I wanted you to know that yesterday I had a passenger tell me that flying with Pinnacle was the best travel experience she'd had in 20 years, Jennifer said as I settled into my seat. She specifically mentioned feeling respected and valued throughout her journey, from check-in to arrival. As we pushed back from the gate precisely on schedule, I opened my laptop and began reviewing plans for the next phase of operational improvements. The transformation that had begun with recognizing the human impact of corporate decisions had evolved into a comprehensive approach to business excellence that continued to create new opportunities for innovation and improvement. The view from my window seat showed the Denver skyline and the mountains beyond, the same landscape I had observed from Pinnacle's boardroom during those first crucial meetings. But now I saw it with the perspective of someone who had learned that the most significant changes often begin with the willingness to see familiar situations from entirely new viewpoints. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Marcus, we just received confirmation that 3 other major airlines are implementing customer service reforms based on the Pinnacle model. Your operational excellence framework is becoming the industry standard." I smiled as I typed my response. "Rebecca, I think we've demonstrated something important. When companies design their operations around respect for every person who chooses to do business with them, everyone benefits. That's not just good customer service, it's good business." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.